All right. Well, we can get started without Evan, who we definitely want on the panel. But one of the best parts about the Energy and Mining Summit series that Bitcoin Park does, we really kind of touch on all facets. And we've heard a lot in some of these other conversations around the incentive structures, what we're getting paid to take the gas, whatever it is, right? But like we haven't really talked a lot about where the rubber meets the road on that, and how hash rate actually gets converted into Bitcoin. So we've got a really stacked panel here of folks who work on the mining side and develop sort of payment methods to convert your hash into Bitcoin, which you can then convert to fiat to pay your bills, unless you use some of these other cool services. But we're going to talk a little bit about how these payment methods influence decisions. Hey, Evan. But we're going to first start with introductions. We'll start with you since you came in last.
Hey, my name is Evan. My handle is VNPRC. Sorry I'm late. I had to tinkle. I'm working on an open source mining pool that is doing some very interesting stuff with eCash. You can represent mining shares as eCash tokens and actually create a hash rate futures instrument in this way. And I've been thinking a lot recently about different payout mechanisms and different pool architectures, like different ways we can reimagine the entire mining pool stack. But I guess we'll get into that in a little bit.
Hey, my name is Kulpreet. I go by the handle of Jungly on Twitter. I'm working primarily on HydroPool these days, which is essentially an open source stack to run mining pool. Anybody who wants to can just quickly fire it up and start running it. It's got to have two modes. One is the solo mode, so the payouts go to the miner who finds the block. And the second mode would be a simple PPLNS payout, just straight from the Coinbase. So limiting the conversation to the payout mechanisms, that's where HydroPool is going.
I work at Ocean. Ocean is a pool that attempts to exist in the sweet spot of what's actually doable without hurting Bitcoin too much, while accepting some of the compromises that you have to make for anything to actually work. And that requires a lot of experience and knowledge, which is brought to it by Luke, who was up here earlier, and Jason, and they invented a lot of this stuff, and they redesigned it when the industry just decided to go completely off the charts nuts with FPPS and all the other ridiculous things that have crept into mining that are just not okay. And they just said, all right, it needs to be done like this. And it's a sophisticated, complicated product, but miners that use it soon find out that it's actually a lot better. So it kind of reminds me of getting fiat normies into Bitcoin, where they just go, I don't understand any of this. But once you do, you realize, oh, it's all just immediate, right? Like I don't need to, it's not like banking hours, Monday to Friday. There's no inflation to hedge against all that stuff. I just buy it and hodl. But yeah, it took me a long time to unlearn all that stuff. And that's kind of what transitioning to Ocean is like.
Appreciate that. And I'll give a quick intro for myself because I'll probably chime in. So I'm Jay. I'm VP of Research at Foundry. I'll represent FPPS here. But you've got three really awesome folks who are building some pretty innovative new pool tech, right? Pools have not been disrupted, well, at least since Ocean returned for quite some time. And I think I want to start first, Mechanic, can you talk a little bit about, what design choices, what changes did you make from the existing pools when you guys came back, and like why did you do that, and how does that help your users versus others?
So it's a lot to get through. First off is payout mechanism. So the dominant payout mechanism basically just became a hedge against volatility and also mining pool incompetence and not knowing how to fight against attacks and things like that. I see people laugh at that, but it's true, right? As a miner, it became sort of a thing. Like, I want to get paid no matter what happens, and I don't want it to be my problem if the pool doesn't know what it's doing. And that resulted in this payout mechanism called FPPS, which says we will pay you Bitcoins that don't exist. And that's, obviously not a thing you can really sustain unless you take a big enough invisible commission to make it sustainable. And what you see is it results in massive centralization. It's basically impossible to run a pool at any, at small scale or even medium scale. And you see that with the fact that 10 of the small mining pools are really just ant pool, which is horrible because it just skews the perspective everyone has around how much decentralization we actually have versus what it looks like on mempool.space with the pie chart. So that's a problem. Ocean just said, look, we need to go back to the basic concept of what pooling is. Miners split rewards among each other, that's it, and they use a central coordinator to figure out what that reward split should be. And as much as that might set off a red flag, it's really the only practical way to get something kind of off the ground and working and manifest and get us towards a solution where we can start undermining the centralization that's crept into the mining space. Because not only that, but the main part of our launch 2 years ago or whenever it was miners need to be making their own templates. It shouldn't be on the pool, which is just someone that says, this guy did that much work, this guy did that much work. So we give him 30%, 40%. That's what a pool's supposed to do. It coordinates reward splits. It's got nothing to do with us what ends up in the blocks. That's not a job of a pool, and that's became the default thing. Miners all became hashers because they had nothing to do with the network anymore. I have $100 million worth of ant miners and I don't run a Bitcoin node. This is ridiculous. And that became the norm. And now it's like, okay, you're mining on Ocean. We will literally give you a 50% discount on fees just to incentivize you to please run a node and make your own blocks within a pooled context. And that became something we've proved is practical, right? So Ocean is not something on GitHub that will be argued about for the next 7 years. We have 111, 112 blocks made using the Datum protocol on Ocean, which is miners making their own blocks and submitting them directly to the network, and with templates that were populated by transactions in their mempool, right? This is solo mining, right? They're doing everything independently of third parties, but they are using an upstream third-party reward split coordinator, which in our estimation doesn't violate the definition of being solo. So that's basically how Ocean is designed to operate. We offer that discount. If you want to do what's right for Bitcoin and you want to be sovereign as well, you get a 50% discount on fees. And it resulted in miners earning a lot more money and taking back control of the mining process rather than just being hashers with no interest in what the network does.
I don't want to play semantics, but I do want to push back on the solo comment, because I think one of the things that you guys offer, the payment method you guys use is tides, right? And so, in my view, solo mining is you're dealing with the true volatility of you might wait a year to find a block. But can you go into a little bit more detail about what tides is and how that is different from FPPS and even PPLNS?
Sure. So FPPS basically says there's no such thing as volatility, and in reality says we will absorb all network volatility on your behalf, and the fees we charge for doing such a thing are in our terms and conditions rather than on the sticker price. So it's, no offense, but I find it kind of scammy. But I don't have hate for Foundry. I don't. So PPLNS, there were other things I know you're going to talk about going back to proportional, but proportional was a way. It was a way for miners to, whatever. If we find a block, the split will be whatever the hash rate split was of the pool at the time we found that block, which is sort of the obvious way to do it. But it resulted in pool hopping, which destroys pools pretty quickly. So PPLNS sort of emerged as the dominant method, but it was a theoretical thing and no one implemented it correctly. And you had these sort of less than ideal iterations of it, like Brains' score system that obviously was very unpopular, and they ditched that and went to FPPS. So Tides is the first implementation of PPLNS that does it right. So it has complete share fidelity. It's first in, first out, and has an extremely long window and tracks everything on a real-time basis. And the blocks that manifest from miners using it result in an actual payout for the miners based on their split, because it's shared in real time, and the Coinbase split of any blocks that get found reflect the current state of Ocean's share window. So it's a bit of a mouthful, but basically you see sort of copycat attempts coming from Ocean at the moment that don't do the real-time share tracking. So then you're back to the model every pool uses except Ocean, and some notable exceptions, where when the pool finds a block, all of the money from that block goes to the pool, and then the pool figures out a split and then pays the rest of the miners. Ocean doesn't do that to the extent that it's possible to not do that. Every Ocean block will have a lot of outputs in the coin base, and these are coins with no input. These are UTXOs with no input. And that's the miners getting paid themselves. And this is hugely significant. Not for fungibility is not something I like to undermine by celebrating the fact that these are virgin Bitcoins, but that's meaningful to some miners, definitely, and no other pool is providing that as a thing. But there are also other things, like when people fat finger transaction fees and someone pays 83 Bitcoins in a transaction that ends up in like an ant pool or a foundry block or whatever, the pool always just gives the money back to the person that made the mistake if they can find them. Ocean can't do that because the miners have the money the minute it exists. So the person that made the mistake would have to go to the miners on Ocean instead of someone that is essentially the middleman between the network and the hashers in all the other contexts. So the Tides, if I can sum it up real quick, share fidelity, that we don't do any sort of shift system where we reduce the resolution of everything and there's all that loss of fidelity. That was how PPLNS worked before. We don't do super short windows, which again results in, a mess. That was kind of why on the Brains system you had a 90-minute ramp up and a 90-minute ramp down, but like if you plugged in 80 minutes ago, you would still only get like 50% of the reward. But if you unplug 10 minutes later, you basically get nothing. So it wasn't symmetrical. Tides is symmetrical. It's PPLNS done right. And we were so appalled by how it had been implemented previously, we didn't call it PPLNS. We called it Tides because we wanted to cut association with how badly it had been implemented prior to Ocean.
Appreciate the insight. So, Evan, you mentioned proportional. We'll just dive into that right now. And I think it would be helpful to just sort of, enumerate a little bit the difference that, you're bringing, what you're proposing to build with HashPool. So very, very high level, what Ocean, what Foundry does right now. We have a Stratum endpoint. We'll push out a block template to you. In Ocean, you have a choice of block templates, or you can elect to do it with Datum. You work that, you submit shares to us. We account for those shares internally and pay out based on either Tides or, in Foundry's case, FPPS. Pretty bare bones, pretty basic, but a lot of central points of failure and risk. And I think, Evan, you're working on HashPool, and explain that a little bit more, and then maybe touch on some of that proportional versus PPLNS.
So HashPool, I'm still conceptually deciding on the architecture. Right now in the repo, I'm running Stratum v2 or Stratum reference implementation. And as it's designed right now, which is not necessarily the final design, it will be essentially a group solo pool. So you issue eCash in exchange for shares instead of having accounts. So it's an accountless mining pool. And if you think about it, with all existing mining pools today, they have a database and they keep track of who earns what. And even Ocean, I love Ocean, you guys are crushing it. It's an account-based pool because you input a Bitcoin address. So it's a pseudonymous account, kind of like how Bitcoin itself is a pseudonymous system. With eCash, we can actually blow this up and we can have an accountless mining pool. So the pool has no idea who is hashing, who is trading those shares, and who is redeeming them for Bitcoin. So this is kind of like a completely new paradigm. When it comes to payout mechanisms, there's the two big boys in the room right now. There's FPPS and PPLNS. But actually, I've been thinking a lot about how we can go back to our roots and look at proportional and see how, so proportional was the sort of the original naive way. And the way I think of it is, let's just do a little taxonomy. So FPPS, the mining pool themselves assumes all of the luck risk. Whether you find a lot of blocks or a little bit of blocks, the pool takes that risk on. They pay a flat rate to their hashers. PPLNS pushes the luck risk down to the miners. So the pool itself takes a flat fee of the mining rewards, and the miners themselves either get paid more or less, depending on how lucky the whole pool is. Proportional also pushes the risk down. But the difference between proportional and PPLNS, I think of it in terms of momentum. So in a PPLNS or Tides system, you have a window function. So when I mine a share, there's a time window, or really it's measured in difficulty, where that share has that share is entitled to some of the block rewards for all the blocks that are found in that time window. So when you start mining on a PPLNS system, you have effectively no reward. You submit your first share, and you sort of build up some momentum. And when that time window gets filled up with shares that your miner has submitted to the pool, now you're firing on all cylinders. You get you get all of the hash rate, you get all of the rewards for all of the hash rate that you've mined. And when you stop mining, there's a ramp down period. Mechanic talked about the ramp up and the ramp down. I think of that as momentum. In a proportional system, there is no momentum. So you just count up all of the shares that were accepted by the pool since the last block the pool mined. And when you find the next block, you just divide the Coinbase by the shares, and you pay everybody out. And then we all start over again at zero. This was a problem in the past because of something called pool hopping. So what happens is if your pool finds blocks in rapid succession, whoever mined those first shares right after the last block is entitled to a very large percentage of the reward. If you think about it, your pool just found a block. You mine the first share on the new block. Your share is entitled to 100% of the block reward. Your second share is entitled to 50%, 33%, and so on. So the very first shares after a block is found are overvalued, and then the value of each share after that just continues on a downward trend. So what happened with pool hopping was miners would join a pool. They would mine those early shares right after a block that were worth a lot. And then if no block was found quickly, the value of each additional share goes down. They would just leave and go to another pool. And this creates kind of a death spiral. The pool starts losing hash rate. Everybody's jumping ship because the new shares are not worth that much. I think we can solve this problem. And I think we can do it with two new technologies. The first and most important is a liquid market for hash rate shares. This is a market problem. Some shares are worth more than others. How do you sell shares? Well, it's pretty difficult if you have an account-based database. You have to go to the pool, and the pool has to create a market within their mining pool. I want to bring eCash in and externalize that. So now we have this tokenized asset that lives in the wild. It's peer-to-peer electronic cash. So if I mine up a share, I have an eHash token, I can sell it to someone else. If the pool is a proportional pool, that first share is worth a lot. So I can mine up that first share, sell that eHash token before the ramp down happens, and we can use the free market to solve sort of the impetus of this pool hopping problem. The other thing I think we need to do is we need to make pool connections a little bit sticky, so that once you connect to a pool, like it takes a little effort to connect to a pool and to start mining to it. And if you want to leave that pool and come back later, you're going to have to do that work again. There's something called a proof of work challenge that I think we can solve this. I'm really interested in exploring the possibilities here and seeing what's possible. I also am pushing forward this idea of a layered mining pool stack. So like I said, for FPPS, the pool assumes the luck risk. For PPLNS, you push the luck risk down. We don't need to necessarily push the luck risk down to the miners. We can actually just have a layered mining pool stack where you have, I call it a proxy pool mining downstream of an aggregator pool. So we can have a PPLNS or proportional pool at the top level that finds all the blocks, and we can have multiple pools below it that sort of hang off of it and just own an account at this aggregator pool, and we can do really interesting stuff like eCash. I think there's a ton of potential in the privacy arena. You can do things like lightning liquidity stuff. There's just I want to blow it up and find out what kind of cool shit we can build. But first we need to get away from this monolithic pool architecture where we have FPPS pools eating up all the market share and posing a systemic risk to all of Bitcoin, really.
Lot to go off of with that, but I think the first thing I want to touch on, Jungli, what you're working on, talking about this pool stack, right? We need software for that. Where does that come from?
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, I love the ideas you're exploring. It's super awesome, right? And we kind of tried to do that in my past life on Braidpool, trying to build a hash rate futures and everything. The problem becomes explaining it and then showing that the maths is correct, and then trying to sell it to miners. It's hard work. So I've come a very far million miles from it, which is like, okay, let's build something simple that we can ship, right? That people can experiment on, right? Which is an open source stack for being able to run a mining pool. I've had some conversations with some pool operators, right? And I asked them, right, so what happens if the state attacks you and shuts you down? And their answer surprised me. They've said, oh yeah, we'll just move jurisdictions, right? And they could say that because they have the stack. They have the closed proprietary stack that runs a pool. We as the people don't have a stack that I can say, look, I'm going to fire this up for my 20 buddies, right? And we're going to mine on this because the state has decided to attack mining pool operators, which are all centralized. It's one bank account, it's one centralized servers and all this and that. So I'm very much motivated to build what I call the putty, right? Which is the Hydra pool, which is the idea that here's an open source stack. It does things simple that people understand, right? There is no rocket science here. Here is a set of components. If you want to experiment with them, this will be awesome, right? Let's experiment with payout mechanisms. Let's experiment with accounting mechanisms. Let's experiment with the Stratum connection, protocols. But at the moment, let's start with something that everybody accepts as the industry standards and move on from there. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, and I think that's a powerful tool. I mean, obviously, as closed source centralized pool operator, I'm excited by that because I think competition is good ultimately, right? Free market is what we want, and having the tools to do that, I think, is the first step. We really haven't seen much. There have been some really awesome stuff, CK and other things like that have done a lot of heavy lifting for the entire industry.
Absolutely.
But to see more implementations of that, I think is going to be critical because, again, when we're looking at payouts for customers, right? There's also different customer segments too, and Foundry serves a niche. Antpool and Friends serve a niche. Ocean does as well, and I think having more tools to experiment on that means that we can serve different customers better.
Yeah, there is no one-size-fits-all solution, right? What we want is some people will want lower fees with higher variance. It's a choice, and it's difficult to provide this choice unless you can let people experiment with these choices and build them, right? And
absolutely.
Yeah. So
no, and I think. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I think the approach is like, I think this is it feels really good, and apologies if this. I don't mean to be disrespectful at all. There's something fundamental I feel that is just not correct about it. It's kind of like the illusion of the prepper mentality, right? Like I'm quoting someone else. I can't remember who it was, but you stock up on shotguns and beans and all that stuff. But the zombies just don't come. Instead, you get totalitarian communism instead, and there's just no defense for that.
So maybe that is the zombie that we are scared of.
Well, yeah, but the defense is different. That's the problem, because I wish the government, bear with me for a second, because it's really hard to explain. I wish and have the fantasy that the government just come along and chop the heads off all the giant entities in Bitcoin. And they go, right, you can't be Foundry anymore. China actually bans Bitcoin. Or just does, what they say we're all scared of. And then we have these kinds of solutions. Everyone's spinning up their own pool. And then we just kind of deal with it, right? But it just never happens. What happens is they allow these giant entities to exist, and this is why I say Ocean exists in this sweet spot, because we're just trying to make it so that we do as little as possible, so that if government comes after us, we're like, look, there's nothing we can do. Our miners are making their blocks. You can mess with their next 8 blocks of reward if you cut our head off. Big deal.
Yeah, but what if they tell you shut down your servers? The coordinator's gone. So how about your datum guys do, right? So that's the kind of worst. I mean, call me paranoid or whatever, right? But governments have banned popular things, right? There's a list of them. There's alcohol, there's pornography, there's, it has happened. It doesn't mean, and these are not my words, I'm paraphrasing Eric Voskill, whose work I respect a lot. There is a history of the government banning popular things. Just that it's popular doesn't mean it won't be banned, right?
But the problem is not banning it; they capture it instead, which is way worse.
That's even worse. Yeah, exactly. The question then is if there is a centralized pool operator and it's not being banned and it has been co-opted and you don't even know that as users, that's even worse. Right?
Unless you work like Ocean and the miners are making the templates, then we still can't control what our miners are putting in the blockchain, which is all Bitcoiners care about.
I could be building a template which has an OFAC non-compliant output, and you could refuse to pay me, and then I just have to leave.
Just
Sure,
to jump in real quick, we do have 0xB10C has Pool Watcher. We have open source developers out there building stuff to monitor pools. I agree. If the states take over large monolithic pools, that's the worst thing. But we can at least catch them in the act of censoring Bitcoin.
Yeah, that'll be awesome, right? I mean, the problem is, there's so many combinations that are possible. The more tools we have, the better it is. Right now, all the tools are proprietary and closed source, right? That is the big challenge. And that's why I love this opportunity of being here with 256 Foundation, right? The fact that we need to kind of fight against and bring back open source stacks. Like the fact that it's 2025 and we have to make this argument is a problematic situation. But it's not really that bad, right? I don't know. I'm old enough to remember when we fought MySQL and Oracle and Microsoft, right? And those were big, long, drawn-out battles. Now people use cloud databases just like, oh, it's cool. It's easy for me to run a closed source Postgres replica built by AWS. But these were battles that were fought like for 20 years ago. People were like, ready to go to prison for that. And, wearing those T-shirts with the open source code on it and whatnot. We should not forget those battles. Those were hard-fought freedoms, right? The fact that we could have GPL licensed source code out there was amazing. We just take it for granted and are kind of underestimating the freedom we have at the moment. So all we're saying is like, look, we need to bring that idea of freedom, right, to a big component of Bitcoin, which is the mining, which is actually the most important one, right? Which is what gives us censorship resistance. So it's a simple argument. That's all it is.
I disagree with it as an approach because I think it's feel good more than it is a practical acknowledgement of what we're up against. Ocean's backend is not open source. It's not in any sort of licensed capacity, closed source, but it's not published on GitHub, right? And most of that is just developer ego saying like, look, let me clean it up a bit before I show the world. Because if we open source it, we're going to, because it's the right thing to
awesome.
do on
that's
principle.
Great.
But no one can trivially spin up Ocean's backend. It's unbelievable.
For sure.
So
but you'll be
kind
surprised.
Of a false sense of security is the point.
You'll be surprised how some guys will come out of the woodwork and make it easier to spin it up. They might actually start helping you. That's the whole point of open source software.
That's true, but most of it comes down to DDoS attacks.
For sure. There will be solutions there. You can put it behind Tor. There will be some latency prices to pay. But there are solutions possible, right? I think I'm really delighted to hear that you're thinking about open sourcing it. That would be super
It will
awesome.
be. That's committed
great.
position. Luke
That's
ideologically does not agree with it being closed.
I've got a solution maybe.
Go ahead.
If we have a layered mining pool stack, you can bring your open source tools and just build on top of perhaps a closed source pool. As long as it's a PPLNS pool, PPLNS is composable and proportional is composable. So we can actually have the best of both worlds.
Yeah, sounds very nice.
I think that sounds fantastic. No, I didn't want to step in there because I think we were going down some really good paths. Because again, like at the core of mining, right? Like we could talk about share accounting until everyone here falls asleep, but I think what the share accounting is for. The purpose of all this is to enable the Bitcoin ecosystem to flourish, right? Like we can't have freedom preserving technology without miners that are operating within the bounds of the consensus mechanism. And I think that's an important conversation there. So I want to talk a little bit too about how payout mechanisms actually influence centralization, right? Because we talked a lot about the centralization risk, and I think the choices that pools make, whether it's market driven, whether it's tinfoil hat conspiratorial, black leather gloves on stage conspiratorial, whatever you want to call. I want to talk about like how do you guys view pool payouts as like a centralization risk or decentralization enabler?
Well, some of it is just the nature of Bitcoin itself. It has a 2-week thing, a cadence, where if you can't find a certain amount of blocks within that 2-week period, it's over. It doesn't matter if your BitAxe finds a block every 20,000 years. That's not really a thing because you don't chip away at that week by week by week because the difficulty keeps going up. So you mine for 1,000 years, you don't have 19,000 years left, right? You have 60,000 years now because the difficulty went up during that time. So this is like what I mean by occupying a sweet spot of what's practical. You need to be pretty big and you need to be able to find a reasonable amount of blocks in any 2-week period. That means you have to operate at scale, and sort of nods towards ideological things become less relevant, right? So Ocean's back-end status, things like that, it doesn't really matter because anyone else that wanted to do a similar thing is going to have to do something ground up, basically anyway. They can take what we've done and get a head start of it, but actually there's picking apart other people's codes when it isn't intentionally designed for open source thing anyway. It's not readable, no comments, like you're just going to have to write something bespoke. So this kind of like often, the superhero I just found out about Bitcoin mining and I'm here to fix it. That those people tend to come in with like, let's just have more pools, because the more pools we are, the more redundant we are and all that. But it doesn't work, because the more pools there are, the worse they all work, because the harder it gets for them to find a reasonable amount of blocks in a 2-week period. So Ocean is like, we have what, 0.6, 0.7% of the network, and we're just about above what's tolerable now for miners variance wise, and we can hit 100% within a 2-week period, just about. That was hard getting to that level, and that required raising millions of dollars and doing masses of marketing and education. And you know what we managed to do with millions of dollars and flying around the world and having a huge company and doing all this marketing? We managed to get guys with hundreds of millions of dollars to run a Bitcoin node for the first time in their life. Do you know how hard that was? And this is why I'm like, other solutions,
no joke.
like people take shots at Ocean. I'm being defensive about it, but I'm saying, guys, the sophisticated solution you have that is like 10,000 times more complicated than Ocean, it might be good on paper, but have you any idea the kind of system you're dealing with and how difficult it is to overcome these hurdles? You need something that, like, you guys and Antpool are more than 50% of the network. We don't have time to watch the centralized system sort of turn itself into, don't worry, they'll just leave the network alone. They're never going to get co-opted or deputized by the state. We don't have time for that. We need something that works today, and that's what Ocean's entire premise was.
That's so true, man. That's total respect for Ocean to get it out there and then get all the hash rate that you have. It's kudos. It's not easy to build these things and convince people to run any services. Forget about a Bitcoin node, right? I mean, to answer your question about centralization pressures caused by payout mechanisms, I mean, we know the elephant in the room is FPPS. It's the largest. You trade off, variance reduction with fees, and that's what miners do. Miners just want to get regularly paid out, and that's completely fine. That's their business. But they're running with all the operation headaches. It's not easy, right? So, but how did we end up in a situation where FPPS is becoming slowly the de facto standard is kind of really worrying. So any efforts to push back against FPPS, like Datum, Tides, right, HashPool, whatever they are, I think those are incredible, and I think some miners should actually support that work, by actually putting some hash rate on the side, whatever, to kind of support these kind of projects out there. Point some hash rate to Ocean, not just to just an FPPS pool, whatever you're doing, right? Diversity is great, it leads to new evolutionary species that we can't imagine. So,
a couple comments. I think what Mechanic is really describing is the sort of the hurdle you have to jump to become a mining pool business. You have to start finding blocks. You have to get tons of terahash, exahash. But I really think everyone is stuck in the current model, and we should be looking forward to the future. Right now, the vast majority of Bitcoin hash rate is centralized in these giant data centers. They're running ASIC appliances. I think where we're going is small-scale miners. And in fact, not only are we going there, we have to go there to decentralize Bitcoin mining. That's why I'm such a big BitAxe fan. Shout out to Scott, rocking it over there. If you think about it, though, those large-scale miners are paying for electricity to mine Bitcoin. I don't think that is going to be a sustainable business model in the long run. The more popular hash rate heating is, the lower the cost to mine Bitcoin is. And I think it will eventually go negative. It's not that far off in the future. So I think the thing we really need to focus on is reducing the payouts. We need to have more feasible, more economical ways to pay out small amounts to miners. That's why I'm so excited about eCash in particular. There's a lot of other tools in our tool chest, though. I think Ocean, how many Coinbase outputs can you fit in each block?
Depends on how buggy the miner is that finds the block. So if it's a BitAxe, it works great. If it's a S21, it will die and brick on you if you send it more than like 18 outputs. So
18?
Thanks, Bitmain.
There's protocol upgrades that would help with this. If we activate CTV, we could put an entire payout tree in a single transaction. You can do one of those for each of those outputs.
I would
CTV is
love to
awesome.
do a separate panel on CTV.
Yeah, let's do a panel on CTV.
But we got to wrap this. I think we have time for one question. I mean, first, I just want to say thank you to you guys. It was really cool to see sort of the innovation happening on the pool payout side. And then, yeah.